Counter-terrorism police are now leading the probe into an electrical substation fire that has shut London Heathrow Airport for the whole of today, amid claims it could be a Russian sabotage attack linked to Vladimir Putin's campaign of disruption. More than 1,300 flights to and from the UK's busiest airport will be impacted today due to its closure following a fire at the nearby North Hyde electrical substation. Thousands of homes were left without power, with more than 100 people evacuated after a transformer at the substation caught fire, as a huge explosion was heard. Western officials have accused Russia and its proxies of staging dozens of attacks and other incidents across Europe since the invasion of Ukraine 3 years ago. They allege that the disruption campaign is an extension of President Putin's war, intended to sow division in European societies and undermine support for Ukraine, although the Kremlin has denied carrying out sabotage efforts against the West. Earlier this week, Putin had agreed to a limited ceasefire that stops Russia targeting Ukraine's energy infrastructure after a phone call with U.S. President Donald Trump. Now, experts are analyzing whether Russia could be linked to the UK substation fire, which is affecting 679 flights scheduled to land and 678 departures from Heathrow. Scotland Yard's Counter-Terrorism Command is leading the investigation given the need to quickly establish whether sabotage was involved and the pressing security questions relating to how a single fire took down a major piece of infrastructure. It comes after Russian spies sent a package of electric sex toys to Western Europe before concealing incendiary devices ignited in UK and German DHL depots last July in what was alleged to have been a test run for a potential US-bound flight attack. Reacting to the Heathrow fire today, security expert Will Geddes, director and founder of the International Corporate Protection Group, told Mail Online, "Heathrow has been looking at expanding. This isn't a great advert for their ability to do so safely. If I was a foreign hostile party and I wanted to disrupt one of the busiest airports in the world, cause international embarrassment, create many question marks, I would target something like a substation. The Russians are looking at everything. They're looking at our fiber optics under the sea. They're looking at our nuclear power stations. We know hostile reconnaissance is going on right now. So for this to be taken down so easily and cause such an impact, one has got to say, if I was Russia, that's where I would focus my attentions as well." He said the incident had the potential to be a similar act of sabotage to the fires on railway tracks in France ahead of the Paris Olympics in July. Mr. Geddes continued, "If anybody did this, it would either be down to some serious reconnaissance in advance to determine that this was a massive vulnerability. They would have had to determine what leaning and what depth of responsibility and sort of impact would this substation have, not only obviously on the local homes, but also on Heathrow Airport itself. Or you've got the easier, simpler answer that these guys have fallen asleep and they have not battle-readied this substation for any type of eventuality of potential power outs, fires, or anything like that. Where is the fire suppression system? Why has that not worked? Is that because it's faulty, or because it has been tampered with?" He said Russia and other hostile states would be glad to see the chaos it has caused, and it's not outside the scope of a foreign hostile state to attack a substation or a power or utility supply to a key site. Bob Seeley, a Russia expert and former Conservative MP, told Mail Online that the chaos at Heathrow was at least a warning about the threat of sabotage. He said, "This has exposed a massive security vulnerability. If a substation fire can shut down one of the world's largest airports and Britain's busiest airport, it shows a dangerous lack of resilience. We should be building resilience into our critical national infrastructure, especially given the rise in Russian sabotage operations in Europe as well as the threat of homegrown terrorism or extremist protests designed to bring modern life to a halt. Dr. Seeley, whose new book, New Total War, is out this summer, added, "Until we see different, this was very likely to have been an accident, but it is also a warning to us. We need to design in and build in greater resilience in our critical national infrastructure." Sky News security and defense editor Deborah Haynes said, "Folk who track Russia's campaign of unconventional warfare in Europe will likely wake up wondering if the fire that cut power to Heathrow was an accident or something sinister. Understanding how or why the fire at a substation started will of course be key. Either way, this does really rather highlight the vulnerability of a piece of national infrastructure as critical as our largest and most important civilian airport." And Professor Lucy Easthope, an advisor on disaster response and recovery and author of When the Dust Settles, added, "It actually does not matter whether it was a Bic lighter and pile of newspapers or a deliberate attack. Either shows up the current vulnerability of national infrastructure, civil defense, I use that term deliberately, and the resourcing of response and readiness." It comes after Richard Gaisford, chief correspondent for ITV's Good Morning Britain, said, "Heathrow Airport is a key piece of UK national infrastructure, now brought to a standstill by a fire outside of its well-protected boundaries. That creates chaos around the world. Security services must be considering sabotage." And Nick Ferrari asked on his LBC radio breakfast show, "Anybody know where Vladimir Putin was last night wandering around and with a can of unleaded?" Paul Charles, CEO of travel consultancy the PC Agency, estimated that the cost of the impact to the global aviation system could total around £20 million a day, with no guarantee that Heathrow will reopen on Saturday. Meanwhile, Russian trolls on social media also claimed the Heathrow fire could have been a Putin sabotage operation. One post on Kremlin-funded Ryadovka Telegram channel declared, "Petrov and Boshirov came to see the cathedral again." Alexander Petrov and Ruslan Boshirov, real names Anatoly Chepiga and Alexander Mishkin, were the notorious suspects in the Novichok poisonings of double agent Sergei Skripal and his daughter in Salisbury in 2018. The GRU military intelligence officers, who posed as tourists visiting Salisbury Cathedral, are both wanted in Britain for murder and attempted murder. But they have since been claimed to be spearheading a major Russian operation to sabotage Western countries. Another comment said, "Are Petrov and Boshirov on vacation?" And a third wrote, "Now Petrov and Boshirov went to see Big Ben. The excursion was a success." A fourth said, "Thus, with this fire, Putin is trying to break the will of the British people to help their Ukrainian brothers for free." And a fifth added said, "Are they going to look for a Russian trace again?" Back in the UK, the chairwoman of the Commons Transport Committee said it was speculative to suggest at the moment that something sinister caused the Heathrow fire. Asked by Times Radio if she thought the fire may have been caused intentionally, Labour MP Ruth Cadbury replied, "I think that's somewhat speculative. There are obviously questions about it, and I don't know enough about electricity, but for the airport to be dependent on one substation, it does raise questions." She added it was very, very concerning that one substation can close down an airport and there isn't an alternative source of energy. Meanwhile, Energy Secretary Ed Miliband said the government was doing everything it could to restore power to Heathrow. He was asked by Sky News whether a Cobra meeting of senior ministers would be convened to address the matter. Mr. Miliband replied, "I'm sure the government will be convening in the most appropriate way. I'm not going to anticipate the precise form of that, but I'm already in touch with my colleagues on this issue. As I say, I've spoken to the National Grid, who are really at the epicenter of this, and we will be doing everything we can, both to restore power and help the national grid. To do that, and to ensure that the DFT, Department for Transport, and the government as a whole plays its part in, as best we can, minimizing the disruption to passengers. Speaking to the BBC, Mr. Miliband said the fire was an unprecedented event, and we will have to look hard at resilience for major institutions such as the airport. He told Radio 4's Today program, "I spoke to the National Grid this morning. There's obviously been a catastrophic fire at this substation, an unprecedented event actually in their experience. It appears to have knocked out a backup generator as well as the substation itself. What I know is that they are working as hard as they can to restore power as well as the fire being put out. It's too early to say what caused this, but I think obviously we will have to look hard at the causes and also the protection and the resilience that is in place for major institutions like Heathrow. With any event like this, we'll have to both understand its causes and learn lessons from it." Aviation consultant John Van Hoekstraten said the airport should have been able to rely on its own diesel generators and alternate power cables from the national grid. He added that the apparent failure to provide backup power pointed to a lack of testing of business continuity plans. Mr. Van Hoekstraten of Straten Consulting Services said that airports should ideally have separate power cables attached to the grid, with one acting as a redundancy network to be used in the event of a failure of the main supply. He told Mail Online, "Unfortunately, a lot of the times the cables end up coming from the same substation, and if you have a substation failure, then your redundancy line fails as well. I have seen that so many times in architectural drawings in planning stages where you have a separate line which goes to the same substation." Mr. Van Hoekstraten said he believed Heathrow would also have had 6 or 7 diesel generator plants spread over different sites to provide power for each terminal, air traffic control, and auxiliary services. He said, "Normally the redundancy systems are large diesel engines situated somewhere within airport buildings. The switch-over protocol is normally within 3 seconds. You notice a flick of the lights when they switch on, and that is about T. They will run primary power around the airport facility. They should have multiple generators on site. Each terminal should have its own generators. They are massive and the size of large shipping containers. They can run a substantial amount of electricity and can go on for as long as you put in diesel, with a tank normally lasting 24 hours. I was a little bit surprised when I heard that it was an off-site issue at a substation, which caused the whole airport to close. That is quite significant, that the internal systems failed to pick up the load. A Metropolitan Police spokesman said, "We are working with the London Fire Brigade to establish the cause of the fire, which remains under investigation. While there is currently no indication of foul play, we retain an open mind at this time. Given the location of the substation and the impact this incident has had on critical national infrastructure, the Met's Counter-Terrorism Command is now leading inquiries. This is due to the specialist resources and capabilities within that command that can assist in progressing this investigation at pace to minimize disruption and identify the cause."